After completing this chapter, you will be able to explain the difference between heel and list, state what is meant by the terms displacement and dead weight, define the terms block coefficient and water plane area coefficient, apply Archimedes' principle to a ship floating in water, calculate change of immersion using tons per centimetre immersion, TPC, recognize the effects of moments of mass. It is important to appreciate the difference between the terms list and heel when referenced to a freely floating ship. A ship is lying at an angle of list when the weights on board are unevenly distributed and the static condition of the vessel is at an angle of inclination away from the vertical. A ship is lying at an angle of heel when external forces, such as waves or wind, shift the vessel over to an angle of inclination away from the static condition, perhaps only for a short time. The mass of an object is the quantity of material in that object measured in the units kilogram or ton. The weight of an object is really the gravitational force acting on it, and is dependent on the mass of the object and the acceleration of gravity. Weight is measured in the units Newton, N, or kilonewton, Kn. Therefore, the weight and mass are connected by the formula. Weight equals the mass times the Earth's gravitational acceleration, g. Thus, for a mass of 1 kilo, the weight is 9.8 newtons at most places on the Earth's surface. But for the same mass of 1 kilo, the weight is 1.6 newtons on the Moon. If the acceleration due to gravity is considered constant, then weight is proportional to mass. The same gravitational constant also applies to the upthrust produced by a mass of displaced water. In the context of ship stability, we therefore choose to measure weight and displacement in tons. Displacement is defined as the mass of a ship floating in water. This mass is measured in tons and is normally represented by the symbol delta. The weight of displacement equals the volume of displacement of a ship multiplied by the density of the water in which the ship floats. Dead weight is defined as a measurement of the ship's total carrying capacity. This includes the total weight of cargo, fuel, fresh water, stores, provisions, crew, and items excluding the actual weight of the hull and fixed machinery. The block coefficient, Cb, is a comparison of the ship's actual underwater shape at a given waterline to that of a rectangular box of the same extreme dimensions. The box's height equals the ship's draft, normally summer draft, and the box's length and breadth equals the hull's overall length and breadth. The block coefficient is a measurement that can be used to determine the volume of displacement of a vessel using the formula ship's volume equals ship's length times breadth times draft times block coefficient. Similarly, the water plane coefficient, Cw, is the ratio of the water plane area and the area of a rectangle that has the same extreme dimensions. In order to understand the principles of stability, a fundamental understanding of Archimedes' principle and how it is applied to a floating body is required. The volume of water displaced by a ship can be calculated by determining the underwater volume of the ship, knowing its draft and underwater shape, and then converting this volume into weight of water displaced by multiplying by the density of the water. Alternatively, the weight of the ship can be calculated knowing the weight of the ship's structure, cargo, bunkers, stores, and anything else on board. These two quantities should be the same and are known as the ship's displacement. Tons per centimetre immersion, TPC, is a measurement of how many tons are required to change the ship's overall draft by 1 centimetre. The value of the TPC normally varies with different drafts and possibly different trim and list conditions. If you consider the fundamental theory of Archimedes' principle, TPC will be dependent on the water plane area and the density of the water, since the additional weight loaded must equate to the additional weight of water displaced, volume times density. The formula to calculate tons per centimetre is that TPC is equal to the water plane area times the relative density of the water, all divided by 100. This can then be used to calculate the sinkage or rise when the ship loads or discharges a weight by dividing the weight loaded or discharged by the TPC. To measure the weight of a ship, the density of the water in which it is floating is required. This can be found by the use of a hydrometer. Similarly, to measure the weight of a liquid cargo, the density of the liquid is required. There are two main types of density used in stability calculations. Density, which is defined as the mass per unit volume of a substance. The units for density are normally tons per cubic metre. Relative density is the ratio of the weight of a substance to the weight of an equal volume of fresh water. Since it is a ratio, relative density has no units. If the volume of 1 cubic metre is considered, then the relative density of a substance is the ratio of the weight of the substance to a weight of 1 ton. The moment of a force or mass is the measure of the turning effect of this force about a specific point and will be dependent on the size of the force and the length of the lever from that point. The moment equals the weight times the distance from a specific point. In stability problems, this would normally be expressed in tons-meters. Resolution of moments is determined by calculating the difference between the sum of moments creating a clockwise rotation and the sum of those creating an anti-clockwise rotation. The resultant direction of rotation will be in the direction of the larger of these two sums. To measure the weight of a ship, the density of the water in which it is floating is required. This can be found by the use of a hydrometer. Similarly, to measure the weight of a liquid cargo, the density of the liquid is required. There are two main types of density used in stability calculations. Density, which is defined as relative. The moment of a we have learned that a ship will list due to uneven loading, but heel is temporary and due to external force. Strictly speaking, weight is a force in Newton caused by the acceleration due to gravity. But since this acceleration is common to both downward forces and upthrust, it is often omitted in stability calculations. Displacement is the mass of a ship floating in water, whilst deadweight is a measure of the ship's total carrying capacity. Deadweight includes the total weight of cargo, fuel, fresh water, stores, provisions and crew, but excludes the weight of the hull and fixed machinery. The block and water plane area coefficients give a guide to the ship's form and can be used in stability calculations. Tons per centimetre immersion, TPC, is a measurement of how many tons are required to change the ship's overall draft by 1 centimetre. Relative density is the ratio of the density of a substance to that of fresh water. Since the density of fresh water is 1,000 kilograms per cubic metre, relative density is also the density of a substance expressed in tons per cubic metre.